We're sandbagging.
We're sandbagging on. Thanks, man. This is great. What an opportunity.
Sandbagger News here, reporting from the Harm Reduction Hub in downtown GFunk on the North Dakota side of the Red River this quiet evening in late November. It's almost Thanksgiving, and I find it a fortunate time for beginning something. I'm Willard T. Belly, a GFunk citizen all my life. I was one of Teddy's Rough Riders at Red River High School, growing up here in town, as well as a South Spartan and a Century Patriot. I was a Trojan for a while before realizing that the myth I'd most enjoy drawing my power from is that of the Sandbagger, of that epic ancestry, those legendary people who upon the crest of crisis become the trough of peace, and who together, through the genius of their human spirit, achieve things none could hope to do without the whole. From our fire escape here in downtown GFunk, we see the freezing Red River, as well as the high water mark on the memorial obelisk, that place where the current finally stalled and lulled down. The parties of the bars are just below us, and the swift-moving shadows behind all the apartment blinds indicate life looking to feel itself tonight. Well, what a place for it. When we record on Saturday nights, you will likely hear the persistent bar basses through the floorboards. You will definitely hear the pigeons keeping warm together on the other side of the alley window from the desk on which our microphone sits. Do not be alarmed if from time to time when they chime in, I happen to hold our conversation until they are done. I have a hunch that anything they've got to say about how to keep warm on a cold valley night might mean twice anything we exclaim, hiding in the same storm's harm reduction eye. We are here in the Harm Reduction Hub with the Sandbagger banner hanging above us, to use the most comedic tool of human tragedy against itself. To talk. We're going to talk. But we're going to try to do it with this Sandbagger spirit and remind ourselves, after handling each sandbag we can, that everybody has a place on the wall. Not one human voice is unworthy to hear. All are singing in harmony to the valley's ancient ears, when water breaks its boundaries and sandbaggers appear. So sandbagging, it's really just harm reduction anyway. And the person best suitable to explain what that is my dear friend and homie, who I'm sitting with right now, Mr. Cal. Thanks for being here, Cal.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for being here in your house. We're in your house, eating your crackers and cheese.
Absolutely. That was a wonderful intro. Thanks a lot for having me here on the show. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm excited to, get here in the Sandbagger spirit and kind of tackle and discuss some issues that are, important and relevant. So I guess, what comes first is, what is harm reduction? Harm reduction is like it's a very wide-reaching term. It can be applied to all aspects of life. I'm the president of the Psychedelic Club and the Students for Sensible Drug Policy here at UND. And what it means within our club is related to drugs. Harm reduction basically adopts the stance of neither condemning nor condoning drug use, simply acknowledging the fact that people decide to use drugs. Drug use occurs. And, from a harm reduction standpoint, our goal as sandbaggers is to mitigate and reduce the harm involved in drug use. A couple of ways that happens in our community is, with things such as this recent medical amnesty law that has been passed here in Grand Forks in North Dakota, which involves the ability of, people to call law enforcement in case of a overdose so that they can show up, save somebody's life, and the people there, involved on the scene, the people all using drugs together, don't have to worry about being prosecuted. And this helps to save somebody's life. This helps to save a life of someone who can be rehabilitated and helped and contribute to society in the end.
There are a lot of states that have things called drug-induced homicide laws. Minnesota has this law where, like one story I just learned about, a couple in Ohio were doing heroin together, and they both, the man overdosed, and his girlfriend was charged with drug-induced homicide just for doing drugs with him, even though like she didn't sell him the drugs. Actually, like they were just doing drugs together. She called an ambulance. He still died, and then they sentenced her on charges of drug-induced homicide.
Yeah, that was wild to read about that.
Yeah, and I think it was in Fargo recently. Somebody was charged for leaving their overdosing friend, I think, in the parking lot of a hospital, and not going in. But they still found out he did that, I guess, and they charged him for that. So that's two different stories of people trying to go to a hospital in the case of an overdose and being prosecuted for it. So
that's kind of the opposite. That's the exact opposite of harm reduction.
the fact that you say it was in Grand Forks this was passed, that's a sign of harm reduction.
Yeah, it sounds like this law you're talking about in Minnesota is the exact opposite of harm reduction. I mean, people are essentially told not to bother calling the police because, or 911, because if they do so, they're going to be charged and prosecuted. So this person here is overdosing, and the people around them, there's not really a whole lot of options they can resort to. They're essentially left there high and dry with no options, which is a shame. And that's kind of that's what harm reduction hopes to address, is things like that. We hope to implement implement ideas that can help to sway opinion in that regard. A couple of other things that harm reduction is related to that include harm reduction is Suboxone. A lot of people have heard of Suboxone and methadone, which are opioid drugs, opioid replacement therapy drugs. Basically, heroin. People that are addicted to heroin and opioid addicts can go to doctors and get these medications to help them stave off physical withdrawals. That way they can get back into real life, get back into the swing of things, and sort of contribute to society, hold down a job, network, and meet new people, and go to school, as is, exactly what happened with me. I ended up getting onto Suboxone, and that was a real lifesaver. Additionally, more harm reduction techniques include things such as Narcan, which police in different communities around the United States and around the world are beginning to carry. That drug is an injection that paramedics and police officers can use to reverse an opioid overdose, and that saved a lot of lives. There's clean needle exchanges, which can reduce HIV and the hepatitis C and the spread of those things. And another big thing is substance testing kits. This is real important. We'll get into all these topics a little bit later about, we'll elaborate on each of these topics a little bit more as we go on. Andrew Sadek's law. I don't know how familiar anybody is with that, but that's something also that we'll talk about. And Will does a great job at telling the story, so of course I'll let him do that. He's real good at that one.
Yeah. Harm reduction taking many forms. So one thing that our show is... You hear the pigeons, don't you?
Oh, there they are, the pigeons.
We're trying to talk about these things in a way that's not going to turn anybody off to talking about it. Mm-hmm. Actually, we really want to have a main effect of our message being that it's okay for everyone to talk about it. Really, the only agenda we're trying to push is that we ought to be talking more.
Right.
And we ought to be doing a better job to find common ground with everybody when it comes to talking about this stuff.
Yeah, these are issues that we all have in common. This affects society all around the United States. Everybody's society is impacted by these topics. It's important to talk about in an open, candid, fashion, with understanding, employing empathy, and actually hearing each other's, argument points, and hearing what the input from each side, because each side does have very valuable input, very valid points.
Yeah, so. Often we share the same values, but must somehow disagree on the means with which we think we're going to get there best.
Right.
For example, there's a lot of different attitudes people have about talking about drugs. There's a Facebook group I'm looking at right now called Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess this is just a good example of it's not a tone that we're likely to take with the harm reduction kind of lens. But the truth is, if you look at the actual mission statement of this group,
yeah, they do have some small print here, which kind of clears things up a little bit.
It says, our mission is to get as many users off the streets as we possibly can, therefore killing the local heroin dealer. If they have no users, they have nothing to sell. Profits are dead. It says it's a movement started for people who have actually lost someone due to heroin. We don't condone any act of real killing or violence on this page. Thank you. So, with that in mind, it is easier to remember that even a group taking a stance like this seems opposed to our basic strategies and how we want to go talking about harm reduction in some sense. It doesn't mean that we don't have a lot more in common there still.
Right.
And that actually there is something we agree on, so that means there is some way we could work together. And if only not to get in each other's way. I don't know. There's a way to... Maybe some shows are meant to point out critically how to be against others. I think the whole point of this harm reduction hub is pointing out that all are welcome to this hub, and we're trying to bring all the realist information in so that we can compare it all. And so anywhere you think you are, it's like the Sandbaggers showing up at the Rising Water. Nobody stops to ask your religion or your party before they put you to work sandbagging.
Yeah.
Nobody's excluded on any of those kind of basis. So what I hope we remain solid with doing throughout our course of doing this show and running the harm reduction hub, helping people, is that we would never forget that we are sandbagging just in our own way, the same way as these Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer folks are.
Yeah, absolutely. That mission statement there points to that point you were making about shared values, like this sort of radical title of Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer actually has shared values with our group. Although we would never word it in the way of Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer, but when you dig a little deeper, you uncover those shared values,
Yeah. They must get some flack that they put up with for their name, and some misunderstandings of what they actually are.
Sure, yeah.
But maybe they, like us, kind of use their name to reel in those people to explain them what really is going on.
True, yeah.
Like you said, when the Psychedelic Club was founded, when we were opening our chapter here, our advisor Frank didn't necessarily want us using that phrase because, reasonably, as we had figured out, the more people you talk to and you say, I'm with the Psychedelic Club, they kind of get this wrong impression in their head.
Yeah, there's sort of that immediate standoffishness, oh, what is that?
I think they're assuming at first that we're advocating drug use, and or just glamorizing it or something. And but it's wonderful because they crinkle their nose at it, and it opens up for you to say, well, actually, here's what it really means to us. And as Frank taught us, the word psychedelic, it's coming from these old words that mean mind opening and mind manifesting, spreading perspective, basically, which is what the Psychedelic Club motto is, spreading perspective. James, our friend James, founded the Psychedelic Club when he came home from Afghanistan. He'd been working as an army medic, and he had a lot of problems when he came back, and he tried every kind of treatment imaginable, and the very last thing that he says saved his life was an MDMA therapy sponsored by the government and this group MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. And when he realized that MDMA can be used to treat PTSD, that was one example of spreading perspective and learning something.
Sure.
And that's why he wanted to found the group, to spread more information, good and bad, about all these different substances. And more importantly, use that name as a way to start breaking down the taboo a little bit. Because when you hear it, that's what you think. Ooh, we shouldn't say that.
Right.
But
yeah.
if we make that word become a normal word, it loses its power, and maybe makes it easier to talk about.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I remember, like, the Psychedelic Club. I remember when you came and spoke in Frank White's class, and you had mentioned the term Psychedelic Club. In my past history, as soon as you mentioned that, I just lit up. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm excited. I want to know more. So the name itself, for some people, I'm sure, can be a turnoff, but at the same time, it can serve as a segue, a very practical platform from which you can explain and elaborate what is the Psychedelic Club. And then, from there, you get into what is harm reduction, what is SSDP, what is the Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter that we are as well. And from there you can open up a conversation and sort of pique interest and elaborate on your harm reduction mentality.
It's the Sandbagger name is kind of similar, I'll go to a conference or something, I've got my little name tag on, it says Sandbagger News on it.
Yeah.
People, they squint at it and they say Sandbagger News.
Yeah, I wondered what you meant when the first time you said that. I was wondering, what is that?
Really, yeah. And it's great because then they're asking you about it, and then you get to tell them, well, let me spin you a tale about my friends back home and the flood and all that, and how we're trying to bring people together with that attitude. It's kind of nice. It's like Psychedelic Club. James says, I think they had a poster once in their Boulder, the chapter, where a sign said, do you like drugs? And like big letters.
Yeah.
And it gets you like, what?
Very taboo.
That's purposefully baiting the idea like we're going to be advocating drug use. But as soon as you walk up to the sign, in smaller letters it says, well, we don't condemn drug use, but we're here to spread information so people can learn more about keeping your friends safe and stuff. Yeah. And it's like, oh, wow, sweet. And a lot of people came because of that. Somebody would probably say, if the sign said Harm Reduction Club, somebody might have just kept walking.
Walk right on by.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know what it means. You don't know what is harm reduction, and you don't know what the Psychedelic Club is either. But when you see Psychedelic Club, you're more likely to kind of be like, wait, what? What did you just say? What is that about?
Yeah, and ultimately you're saying it's just about spreading perspective, about opening that mind, about learning and education, basically. Mm-hmm. About harm reduction.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was wonderful, so our group at UND is a chapter of the Psychedelic Club, which has probably a dozen student chapters around the country, and a chapter of SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who've got more than 1,000 chapters around the world, and they've got a big staff of people. I guess I'm not sure how big. I don't know. They have a staff of people dedicated to organizing the student chapters and fundraising and throwing these conferences and stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's really wonderful. Last year, we traded in all of our club activity points from the wonderful Tyler Williams cat tracker system, and I got to go to the MAPS conference in San Francisco last year. SSDP paid my travel and my hotel room and my registration to the MAPS conference, to the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. Mm-hmm. Booyah. They were having this conference to acknowledge the end of their Phase 2 MDMA studies, of which James, who founded the Psychedelic Club, was a part for his PTSD, the PTSD study.
MDMA being ecstasy.
Yeah, Molly.
The specific compound that is, responsible for the psychoactive effects of ecstasy.
Right. We should definitely have an episode soon where we just talk about MDMA and this therapy and this study.
Yeah. There's tons of topics.
But just to point out, it's not like you get prescribed a medication from a doctor, you take it home and you take it every so often.
Right.
The MDMA study, for the record, is you do it with a team of therapists, actually. You do it 3 different times, 2 weeks apart. I think we'll have to double check, but just 3 times, certain time interval apart. and you do it with your therapist. It's not like you're just doing it afterwards. And then after those 3 times, you're usually good, and you don't do it ever again.
Right.
But anyway, really amazing how you can use these different things, and that's, I guess, one of many things we can learn.
Yeah, that's some very exciting findings. Very interesting.
And what was so wonderful about MAPS was I realized it's not just us sitting here talking about harm reduction and drugs, us in North Dakota alone. We're not alone. There were thousands of people from many, many countries all around the world explaining what they're doing about harm reduction, and so much research now finally coming out, really good scientifically peer-reviewed research explaining that some of these things really are medicinal in the right way, and some more about the chemistry we're all learning, and more about effects and policies that work and don't work, and wow, it's just so much fun. And we are part of this huge community.
Yeah.
It's this whole
Very
sandbagging
exciting.
community. They've been sandbagging this whole time, and we thought it was only us up here on the Red River. That's
so
just
exciting,
silly.
yeah.
So I'm excited, and I'm glad to have Frank on board too. What did you think of Frank's class?
I thought that was really fun. Yeah, his class is called Drugs and Society, and that was a fascinating class. It was about drugs and society, obviously, but how drugs interact with society, and how legal policies and stuff like that. And it got into a little bit of the myths surrounding drug use and the drugs themselves, and the realities of drugs themselves, the risks and the benefits of each drug. It was a very fun class. It was very fun, very nicely structured, and Frank is like an energetic talker. He is always moving around the class, holding your attention and telling, funny stories, and just he's a real character, a real awesome class. I had a blast in that class.
It would be good to have him in here telling us how he first learned about harm reduction.
Yeah.
He grew up in a very different time from us, and it'd be cool. We're constantly learning from Frank.
I'm grateful to have him as an advisor.
Yeah. So our scheme right now, I think we can announce, because we finally I talked to Cal's dad today on the phone. We're trying to pitch something. SSDP is having a conference in Baltimore first weekend of March, and for our SSDP points we've been building up, we can trade them in for conference travel, and we want to propose also to have a session at the conference. And so we're thinking of all of our ideas, and we have a couple that might work. One, which would be a really fun idea, about confidential informant reform in North Dakota, talking about how Andrew Sadek's law was passed this year, and our other idea, which I'm excited about because Cal's dad said he would do it if he gets a chance to help us, is to have a panel about Suboxone, because you and your dad could have a wonderful conversation about that. And I'm excited to have Frank there too. If our pitch gets accepted, it'll be your dad and you talking about how you learned about Suboxone, and Frank there too. And you've actually seen Frank in the classroom more often, and heard him speak more than I have. And what do you think his presence will do during that conversation with you and your dad? I expect he would ask a lot of good questions, or be able to maybe help explain how we ought to communicate the science behind the harm reduction stuff, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. His energy there, interacting with my dad would be a wonderful thing. My dad is Kurt, my dad, is a Suboxone provider in Bismarck, and he has been doing that for a few years now. He actually caught interest in that as I got on to Suboxone, to treat my opioid addiction. And I think having Frank there would be perfect. It'd be awesome. Someone well-versed and very experienced in drugs like Dr. Frank White, he knows the content. He teaches a class about the content. So he would be a perfect perspective to have interacting with my dad, who is also a doctor, very well-versed and very educated and knowledgeable about Suboxone and medicine in general. And those two perspectives would be just perfect to have interact there. And then, of course, I'll be I'd be interacting as well, the first-hand experience of opioid addiction. It would be fun. It would be so great.
Yeah. I feel like we'd all get along, too, just hanging out.
Yeah.
I've met Kurt and, of course, Frank, and I think we'd all have a good time.
Yeah. Be a fun time.
Yeah, that would be cool.
This move for, the club at NDSU is sort of attempting to launch a ballot initiative, I believe it's called, where they go around and get signatures to get medical or get recreational marijuana rather put onto the 2019 ballot. And part of that is because of some of these people that are waiting for the medical marijuana have waited so long. And of course, once it's implemented, there will still be hurdles for people to get their medical marijuana, presumably. Not necessarily so, but presumably.
We should get somebody who knows about all this.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good.
Come and do more talking about it. There are a lot of questions I have. What are some other topics we'll get to?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to focus on. Kind of, this is our introduction episode, and some of the upcoming topics include, Sadek's Law, which I love hearing you tell that story. You tell it so fluidly, and you just move right through the story, and you use very powerful words and everything. You do a great job at that. The MDMA, substance testing kits, the war on drugs, legal policy around the world.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people just here in good old GFunk to talk to about this too. Nate, our buddy who is with the UND Been There Done That group, it's like addiction recovery group. We could have Nate come in and talk about what he does. He does a lot of work with the city. They have I need to ask him more about it, a committee or kind of task force about recovery going on, and they've done events. They had a recovery rally in the park at the farmers market downtown. And it was like they've done it many years in a row, and it was actually the first time I had heard of it, and it was pretty cool. So they've been talking about recovery and harm reduction in that sense for a while. So I'd like to learn more from him about things going on in the city here in good old GFunk. People to talk about. We just heard about that guy, Tristan, with the group Students for Opioid Solutions a day or two ago in the Grand Forks Herald. Just read about this group, and they're applying for university funds basically to make legislation happen that would allow North Dakota employees, basically people in the dorms and professors, I think even, or maybe definitely the university police, to have naloxone, Narcan.
Oh, okay, sweet.
So he's seeking a bill or a resolution or something to allocate money for Narcan, and they have to actually change the legislation, state legislation, to allow that to happen, which is interesting. So we could have him in here soon talking about all the stuff he does.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions we can take this, but what a great thing. I'm so proud of this movement that is focusing on recovery and helping people get into the swing of things and contribute back to society. It seems like so often I encounter sort of a tone of dismissal towards drug addiction and just drugs in general. And I mean, I remember even encountering that with my dad, who's now a Suboxone provider. I remember when I was 16 or 17, sitting there one time in the living room watching the show Intervention with him, and I remember there was sort of like a dismissal, negative attitude towards drug addiction, which of course is reasonable, but at the same time it is so empowering and so supportive to see this huge movement, this huge community come together and support each other and focus on these issues of drugs and drug addiction and helping people get back into things, get back into contributing to society. It's wonderful.
It's in the Sandbagger spirit.
It's the Sandbagger spirit, that's right.
to want to empower everyone, no matter where they're at, no matter how old they are, or what mind state they're in, or how many fingers they've got. Yeah. It feels good to be trying. What do you think the harm reduction hub ought to be? I'm trying to imagine what we're trying to create here. It seems to me like a website, a gathering place where people are meant to be able to access information and resources for harm reduction, right? And to bring people together to collaborate on new ideas and to host live events and in-person things and digital things. And
yeah, I think it would be real good. I think this hub, I mean, you spoke about it recently in, really powerful imagery. You were talking about, like, what is this hub? What is this harm reduction hub that we want to create? What is this thing? And we kind of we brainstormed a few ideas, and, we came up with this idea that it would be a website, a community of people that share harm reduction stuff, information. They share, drug information, sort of like links to Erowid, which offers, sort of like addiction profiles and overdose profiles of drugs, and basically like, very specific information about each specific drug,
including how to use them safely.
Yes, yeah. Links to substance testing information websites. Basically a website, a community where, all different groups are connected, sharing videos, sharing harm reduction YouTube channels, and just a hub of resources.
With I think this constant background sincerity feeling that reminds us that we're getting along here, whether you like it or not, because that's just what happens when you sandbag. And so there's no room here for straightly putting each other down, but it's exactly the space for questioning each other and pushing each other along and figuring this out together.
Yeah, having a website like that, there might be other websites out there like that, but the specific purpose of this hub will be to reach our viewers, people that don't already know about those websites.
Somehow to put all those groups together,
to connect all the groups.
Right, maybe there are a lot of places where you can do that. If you just set your Twitter to be following a certain number of these groups, that's one good way to kind of stay up to date and find some good news sources about this, or some good tones.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Just a hub for all the viewers, and if nobody's aware of this Twitter connection you're talking about, then maybe they'll see it through the hub.
Just another, I guess our perspective would be assembling all the most sincere knowledge and commentary we can about this stuff in one place.
Sure.
Because it's hard. Most people don't know where to go to turn to really find the true latest research about this stuff. It's hard to just Google that. So maybe we keep track of all that on our site too. The current legislative status with certain substances and the current known their viability as treatments, or their fact of being bad for you, or whatever.
Yeah.
We can keep track of all that. That'd be really fun, really important, I think. Imagine what could my friends who died have benefited from. I try to imagine some resources that, if they had been available when my friends died, maybe they might not have died, right?
Yeah, that's a big motivating factor behind this whole idea, behind this whole movement is, we know, I've known good people, you've known good people that have found themselves in very bad situations, or even have passed away as a result of drugs, as a result of overdose, as a result of misinformation, or simply not knowing where to go to get this information, to get accurate information about the drugs.
For some of those friends of mine, the thing that could have saved them would be substance testing. And I think we should go into this in great depth, but right away the number one thing to explain is the substance testing that is available to people who pay $20 or more to have the kit shipped to them from Amazon are horribly inadequate for everything they're trying to stop. But even the rudimentary ones can help you decide not to do something you're about to do. A lot of the people that I knew who died only died because they misdosed so badly because they were taking a different substance other than what they thought they were taking.
Right, yeah.
And if they had used the substance testing kit, in the case of one friend who died, thought he was taking LSD, he's actually taking 25I NBOME, which has a really intense overdose threshold, and he died. If he had even this rudimentary kit you can get, it might have shown him that there's NBOMEs in there, and he might have decided not to ingest it. My other friends who were taking opioids didn't realize that there was fentanyl in their opioids, and some kits, these really, really rudimentary kits, are not going to be able to detect fentanyl and all the different derivatives and everything. And even when they do accurately tell you that, yes, your MDMA is really MDMA, it can't tell you the dosage, so you could always still misdose yourself in that sense.
Right. It's better than nothing. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Absolutely. And there's a lot, like, the only way to know for sure is when you get it from a doctor. You're not going to misdose because you have something that's not really there. You know? If it says on the back of your pill bottle, this is OxyContin, you know exactly what your dosage is. And so in that sense, you're going to be safer because you're not going to misdose yourself unless you do it deliberately.
Yeah. That's part of why I'm so grateful to have this opportunity here today on this channel, is because that's a very important message to communicate. Like, whenever I hear, the buzz about LSD, people are talking about LSD and ecstasy and MDMA, it is so critical for people to know that those, something that's marketed as ecstasy or LSD is not necessarily ecstasy or LSD. And that fact gets overlooked so frequently. And that is why I am so grateful to be able to say that right here today on the radio, that gets overlooked, LSD is oftentimes not LSD. Like you mentioned in the case of your friend overdosing on the 25I NBOME, that's a drug that's easier to synthesize. And it gets passed off as LSD. But the difference is LSD is very difficult to overdose on, whereas 25I NBOME is very easy to overdose on, especially, when mixed with alcohol and stuff like that. And that's something I remember hearing so much about, is like people would talk about having LSD and never questioning whether it was actually LSD.
Right. With things like heroin, I think people have always, and cocaine and MDMA, trying to do any of those stuff, people know there's a high, or at least some likelihood that what they have has been cut with something.
Yeah. And
oftentimes they're pretty liberal about, like, thinking that's not a big deal. Like, oh, it was just cut with something. Like, well, it could have been cut with anything. And most times, James Casey, one of the things they did in Colorado Boulder at the Psychedelic Club was they had these substance testing kits available to students who checked them out from them, basically, went home, used the kits, and then returned the kits cleaned. And it's just this bottle of reagent liquid, actually. It's not really a kit, but anyway, they were keeping track, and more than 80% of the students who used the kits, who thought they had MDMA, really had amphetamines and something more like bath salts in their stuff. And more than 40% of the students testing their LSD actually had MBOME, which has killed people up here and everywhere elsewhere. So that was really wonderful. They were keeping track of that data.
Yeah.
And showing that is a problem. Since they've decided with the university that it's kind of a liability issue to even make that available, so they had to stop. Which, at one hand, is reasonable from the university's perspective. Like, I guess you wouldn't want a student to use this kit and then overdose anyway, which is still, like, not a horribly unlikely thing to have happen, because these kits are not good enough. But if you're telling people, you're just reducing their access to that harm reduction. So even that, we're not allowed to seek. People are not allowed to seek. So it just shows the double bind we're in.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to learn about what's going to keep us safe if we can't experiment with all this stuff? And
it's almost like ripping condoms off the table. You can't have condoms, not providing access to condoms. As you had mentioned earlier, condoms are a harm reduction technique. Or I don't know if you'd mentioned it on the show or not, but in our discussion, harm reduction is a wide-reaching term, and condoms fall within that realm of harm reduction. So this example you're giving here is almost like ripping condoms off the table.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. What else would my friends have benefited from? And is that something we can create now so that it's there for other people?
Yeah, I think maybe your friends would have benefited from hearing a show on the radio, a discussion on the radio daily, just kind of discussing drugs. I mean, people that take drugs think about those things all the time. They're thinking about drugs, and of course they're thinking about their responsibilities and stuff, but having a radio show like this would have been good for them.
Just to know that it's something our society can talk about is important for all of us to know. Christmas time every year, I start remembering the fact that I know people who have lost their children to drugs and addiction, and they're so afraid and ashamed to admit that they lie about it in their Christmas cards the year their kid dies about what happened to him. And they'll say it was just a heart attack or a stroke or something, when really it was addiction that killed them.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so remarkable about that, when you think about it, is the very same taboo that was strangling their kid and keeping him or her from getting help now has the parents too, in that grip of shame that's going to prevent them from getting access to real information and resources that they could benefit from.
Yeah, that's a very big deal, that profound stigma surrounding drugs. Like you had mentioned, there was no safe place for your friends to have talked to anyone about, their drugs, the drug usage, or their bind that they were in. There was no one they could go to, no resources that they had, really. And there was that stigma that was kind of pounding down on them, telling them not to talk about it. So basically, establishing this atmosphere in which it's okay to talk about this kind of thing. It's okay to talk about our past addictions, our current addictions, drugs in general. It's okay to talk about drugs in general, the risks, the benefits, and addiction potentials and stuff like that. It's important. It's important to talk about these things because they're very prevalent. They're everywhere. So that would have been good. That would have been helpful for them.
My friends would have benefited, I'm sure, from more available treatment, and that includes things like Suboxone. But one thing that's important also is support for relapse. This is something that's wonderful. We should talk a lot more, so learn a lot more about safe injection sites. So this is not really established yet. Cities across America are still trying to figure this out. Toronto has a really good program for this, I guess. Creating a place where opioid addicts can come with, and it's different in some places, but in some places, like, you bring your own stuff with you, but then you get a clean needle and you administer these drugs to yourself within the presence of a nurse. And in a situation where they give you another clean needle when you leave, and they make sure you're safe, and you can check in with a counselor when you're doing this. And this is a known, scientifically supported harm reduction strategy, and yet sometimes it's hard to come across that way. A lot of people would think that by making something like that, you're increasing the drug use.
Right. That's what I was going to ask.
You're just giving drug users a place to do drugs safely, and we ought to be rounding them up and throwing them in jail instead. But actually, this shows that I don't think anybody's ever overdosed and died in the presence of one of these sites. These where doctors are with you. It's there's not been somebody die. So that's who knows how many of those people would have died if they were on their own. I guess it's hard to say. I think they're gathering more data about that. But to realize that we should accept the fact that even if we were offering everybody enough treatment, which we're not right now, say we were, we have to have things like the safe injection site ready, because relapse is an important part of the healing process.
Right.
That's what everybody tells me. That's like got to be something that's true. You have to expect relapse, and you have to be able to work with that. So when somebody relapses, to have a place like that is still going to be really important to them. It's not just encouraging drug use. It's catching that net for the relapse folks, because it's going to happen. So we can excuse ourselves of that without thinking that we're encouraging drug use, when now there's a lot of data showing that actually by doing that, decreasing it. And all of my friends and everyone I've known in addiction could have benefited from a little less of that taboo, that stigma, preventing all sincere discussion. Really broke my heart. My friend made a documentary about some of the kids we grew up with who died, and she screened it downtown here at a big packed public gathering, and the doctor from the emergency room hospital was there on stage answering questions afterwards, and he said that we shouldn't listen to drug users. We shouldn't take their input into considering what we ought to do about drug laws and drug policy and treatment. And he said something like, if you're using drugs, the only people who want to legalize drugs are the ones who are using them, and if you're using them, you're biased to the conversation, and we shouldn't listen to you, or something. You know, that's really heartbreaking, because they were living in that world where they could not talk about it whatsoever, where they were being told by their community leaders that though they were addicted and involved in drugs, they were not qualified to speak or have input on what we ought to do about them. And if they were living in a different world, they might have been able to stand up and say, like, you know what, here is something I need, and find the treatment they needed.
Yeah, how do you address somebody's needs if you don't listen to what their needs are? Yeah. It's almost the exact opposite. Like, you know, you have to take input from the people who are affected by this.
And
Let's do this.
oh yeah,
We didn't do that.
Maybe, wait, let's do that now.
Oh, okay.
But first,
Thanks for holding. Can I help you?
Hi, is Tom Murphy, who's with his task force around, or?
He's out in his vehicle getting some people evacuated.
Oh, okay. Is that where everybody is?
Yes, they're all evacuating residents.
Okay. Okay, I'm running a motel full of people that have been evacuated.
Okay.
And I've got a guy here from Minneapolis that's really smoking pot upstairs. I don't know what to do about it. It doesn't seem like a major problem right now, except I've got all these flood evacuations.
Oh, yeah, I can understand that. Tell you what, let us get the situation under control. Can you give us a call back in about a half hour? Because we just had some dice area that we have to get cleared out right now.
Where is that?
Some of the Lincoln Drive area.
Oh, okay.
Still, and it's coming further, so we have to get those evacuated. Thank you.
That was funny.
the record shows that the woman did not call back ever.
Yeah, so maybe we want to explain real quick in case they couldn't hear that, what happened.
Well, this is the database of all the 911 calls made during the 3 days of the 1997 flood, in which the Sandbaggers were in full swing. And I love these calls because they're really interesting. You hear people saying, "We need sandbaggers, bring the sandbaggers." You know, it's pretty cool. But this one call in particular tagged, it's hard to miss it in the tags, tagged marijuana. The woman, if you couldn't hear her, called in. She's the town is in the middle of evacuating. 55,000 more people are evacuating because of the flood and the dikes have broken. But the woman calls in to the police department to complain that somebody's smoking pot in her. Actually, a guy from Minneapolis is really smoking pot upstairs, and she almost felt embarrassed to bring it up, though, didn't she?
But she felt compelled to bring it up, nonetheless.
Yes, she knew, like, there are other... I mean, that's the first thing she says, is there's other important things going on, I know. But I felt, compelled to tell you this.
Yeah, that's interesting. In the middle of the flood, and that was in 1997.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That speaks a little bit to like the tone and the atmosphere surrounding drugs in that time. I mean, she felt like it was urgent as the flood to call this thing in and say, I don't know if you guys want to come bust him or whatever.
Right. Right.
And it's interesting to see how, tides have changed a little bit over the years. Maybe we would or would not see that happen nowadays.
Right. Right. I wonder if that clip will get funnier as more time goes on.
Yeah,
when the taboo about, say, smoking pot is just a little less.
Yeah.
I wonder if the the wholesome comedy of that call just increases in value as a historical object of how we once thought.
Yeah, it's a little bit of like a historical artifact, that phone call.
Yeah, it's really funny. But again, the woman calling, she was doing her sandbagging duty, Mm-hmm. She thought that's what she ought to do for the benefit of everyone,
Right, yeah.
And in her way, she was sandbagging right then, just same as everybody who was actually down by the wall. And our goal on this show will always be to take anybody's voice like this, mm-hmm. take anybody's perspective and consider it valid, and then see how you can work with somebody. So we don't necessarily need to criticize this woman or anything. We can point out where we differ on some ideas on what would be best, and I don't know. We can go on like that.
We find the common values.
That's what we do. We find what we have in common with these people. And so anybody who calls the show or wants to send us messages or be a part of our discussions or anything like that, we have to remember at the Sandbagger News Harm Reduction Hub, all are welcome.
Yep, we're all sandbaggers.
Everybody has a role to play in the whole. I'm gonna think about this Harm Reduction Hub. I'm gonna dream about it like I'm walking up to the most beautiful sandbagging thing I've ever seen. Imagine a place where the only thing there's no space for is what there already is. Our tradition will be one of change. We are called Sandbagger News because we are the new ones. The sandbaggers on the wall, sent to uphold a mythic tradition and bring peace to human people with an ancient dance with grandmother environment. It has long since been the first one, and it will long yet be the last. We are here to learn, remembering everyone has a role to play in this fantastic sandbagging stage of life. Even we, silly sandbaggers, scheming in our own isness, just above the place where hardly 150 years ago our community began engagement with the Red River Valley, our ancestors' immigrant home. We all came from somewhere, son, just like every last drop of the Red River mud. Someday somebody might scoop us up and chuck us on a pile with 100 million others for the sake of some great unknown purpose we will be proud to be a part of. In the meantime, we'll be here sandbagging. And if you'd like to be involved in our show or our discussions, please share with us links or questions or comments or topics we ought to be talking about more as a community. Please reach out. Each episode of the Sandbagger News Harm Reduction Hub show will be live on KEQQ 88.3 FM here in good old Grand Forks GFunk on Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. on your way to work, everybody. Right after the incredible Ask Noah show. Our episodes will also be posted to Facebook and our website, sandbaggernews.org, after each week, too. Probably another good time to say thank you to Noah, our homie, who hooked us up and inspired us to create this public forum where really all are welcome. Mm-hmm. And from the bottom of our sandbagging hearts, Cal and I are really, really excited to see where the conversation goes from here, and to do some more perspective spreading of our own along the way, and some good old sandbagging. So, thank you, miigwech, isnis, sandbag on.